Next one is fire blight. Affects apples, crab apples, pear, cotoneaster, hawthorns, and quite a few others. This is caused by a bacterial disease, and so it's another one of those Erwinia pathogens. And this bacteria, so it causes these very, very distinct kind of shepherd's crook and black ends of the shoots, but the bacteria overwinters at the edge of cankers. And so here we have in this corner picture, we have a canker that is caused by fire blight. And you see, if you're able to notice some of the kind of the shiny exudate on that canker, that's the fire blight bacteria. That's the Erwinia bacteria that's now oozing out of it. And so any insects that are there, rain or wind, that can all spread the bacteria to different shoots or also to different trees in the area. As far as controlling fire blight, planting resistant varieties is going to be your best bet. Prune and discard your infected tissue, infected branches. You'll also want to make sure that you're not pruning during the middle of the season. And so we recommend that you do your pruning when the trees are dormant. But also, if you're cutting out that canker, don't prune right beneath that canker. Make sure that you're pruning down at least 6 to 12 inches underneath that canker, because that bacteria will have spread throughout the tree. And even though the canker is no longer there, there may be some bacteria there if you just prune that out right underneath that canker. Here we have apple scab, favored by wet and humid weather. We tend to get these olive and greenish black lesions on the leaves, petioles, and also on the fruit. Control of apple scab, again, same with the other ones that I've talked about, plant-resistant varieties. You want to make sure to rake and remove infected leaves. And this is one of those that by the time we start to see symptoms of apple scab, it's often too late. And so if you have a history of apple scab in your area, you'll want to start doing some protective fungicide sprays as soon as flowering starts. This one, cedar apple rust, great symptoms, or actually signs of the disease. So cedar apple rust has 2 different hosts that it requires to survive. This is the disease on a cedar tree, and these are teleal horns that are coming out. So those orange fingers that are protruding out of that gall, those are chock full of the fungal spores. Kind of looks alienish almost. But can affect apple, crabapple, and hawthorns, favored by wet weather. And then the spores are blown from the juniper host onto nearby apple trees. And then the apple trees get infected. The leaves can become infected, but when the fruit's infected, it's infected at the blossom end. And then that fruit tends to get distorted, and really it's just not going to be near as big as you would get otherwise. Here is again, quickly the life cycle of cedar apple rust. And so it overwinters as these galls on the junipers or on the cedar trees. In the spring, those teleal horns start to come out. And when you're seeing those teleal horns start to come out on the junipers, that's going to be a sign that now I want to spray if you do want to do a fungicidal spray for your apples, now's the time to do it. As the spores will blow from the junipers or cedars onto your apple trees. Next one, Dutch elm disease. This is a fungal disease that's vectored by the elm bark beetles. But it can also spread through infected grafts and root grafts. And so if you have a Dutch elm, a tree with Dutch elm disease and a few other elms nearby, you'll really want to be careful to make sure that you're doing some trenches to make sure that the roots aren't grafting together. If the roots graft together, that fungus can spread throughout. And again, management for this one is primarily removal of the tree. Once you start to see symptoms on the tree, it's typically too late to do anything to save it. There are some elm trees where people have done some fungicidal injections that have prolonged the life of that tree, but again, that's very expensive and requires repeat applications pretty much every year. And the streaked vascular tissue that we have in the corner picture here, if you peel back the bark and you see just these nice, very evident streaks like that, that's one of the diagnostic signs of Dutch elm disease, symptoms of Dutch elm disease. Next is oak wilt, and this is another one of those fungal vascular diseases of trees. Similar to Dutch elm, it'll start out kind of as individual branches that are starting to yellow or die. Eventually, it'll be the entire oak tree. And again, with these, if you get oak wilt and you're starting to see these leaves that kind of get these burned leaves, often just half of the leaf will have that burned look to it. It's a good sign of oak wilt, but once your oak trees have it, there's a good chance they have to be removed. Again, fungicide and chemical injections, very expensive and can open the tree up to some other diseases as well. Verticillium, another one of these vascular wilts. Verticillium, in addition to a lot of trees, verticillium affects pretty much every plant that's out there, especially if the plant will have a woody base. There is a Verticillium dahliae can probably infect it. It's caused by a soil-borne fungus that attacks the vascular system. And similar to Dutch elm disease with verticillium, if you peel that bark back, you'll just tend to see some nice streaks that occur, as we can see right here. This one you'll want to favor. It's favored by cool temperatures. There are some trees have a better rating for verticillium than others, and so if it's in the area, make sure you're choosing a resistant variety. Verticillium pruning is somewhat effective for this, especially if you catch it early enough. But if you are doing pruning to remove the diseased tissue, you'll want to make sure that you're disinfecting your tools between cuts so that you're not spreading the fungus. Also, if you do have the infected wood, you'll want to make sure to burn it. That's the only way to kill this fungus. And verticillium wilt is much worse when there are other environmental stresses going on. But next one is just a general canker of a tree. And so cankers are a localized diseased area or lesion of the bark that often result in an open wound. And you can have cankers on the main trunks, you can have them on the primary branches, you can have cankers on the smallest twigs that are out there. Here's an example of, this is Cytospora canker on a spruce tree. But anytime you have a tree and it's one portion of it is just dead, try to follow that dead portion just follow it down back to the main trunk if you can. And there's a good chance you'll see some sort of canker that's developed. That canker cuts off the vascular system. Nutrients and water are no longer able to flow through there to get to the affected areas of the tree. So some conditions that favor cankers, and other environmental stresses that may occur. So if you have drought stress, something like that, drought stress increases the prevalence of some cankers, but other cankers are favored by excess moisture. So it's a little bit difficult. A lot of cankers, they don't require, but they really prefer having some sort of wound that they're able to enter through. So avoiding excess wounding of the plant of your trees can really decrease the amount of cankers sometimes. But also, if you get moisture within 1 week of that wounding event, that's a very favorable environment for infection of not only a canker, but really any of these other fungal diseases that I've talked about. So when pruning, try to prune at a time. If you look at the long-term forecast and it says there's no rain for a couple of weeks, that's going to be a good time to prune. As far as management of cankers, identification is typically not necessary aside from just knowing, do I have a canker or don't I have a canker? The actual fungal or bacterial pathogen causing that, typically not going to matter because 90% of the time, we'll just tell you to prune out the affected area and hope that the plant comes back. Chemical controls typically not effective for cankers as they would require repeat applications. We also don't recommend doing any sort of wound dressing to help with canker management. When you address the wound, that can just increase the humidity in the tree, make it really favors the fungi or bacteria that may cause the canker. And again, you want to prune during the dormant period when the tree is when it's going to be dry. And as with fire blight, you want to make sure that when you're pruning that you're cutting at least 6 inches or so underneath that canker. A foot's going to be even better, but just make sure you're going down far enough in the tree that you're able to cut out that entire diseased area.